So next we're going to welcome Anthony Diiorio, founder and CEO of Ethereum, Jaxx, and Decentral, and he's going to talk about, can Canada remain at the forefront of blockchain globally?
Thank you. Correction, I'm not the CEO of Ethereum. Just make a note of that. I did co-found Ethereum. So I just got back from a conference called PolyCon, and there's a number of people from that event. It was a meeting of the minds to give recognition to a project called Polymath. It was in Bahamas, and we got back there yesterday, and a number of people from that event are here. And what was really surprising is that there was about 40 or 50% at this event that were actually Canadians. And there really is a domination right now in our space, in the crypto space, in the blockchain space of Canadians, people from all over, like it was amazing, about half from Vancouver, half from Toronto. And yes, Polymath, the project that was being celebrated there is a Toronto company, but there were people from all around the world. And what Polymath has been able to do recently is an amazing thing. They built up this community. They maxed out Telegram at 50,000 members. It's actually, I think, the largest Telegram group that existed. And what they did was build a massive community to push their project, which is all around a securities exchange platform. And we all been hearing, I'm sure, I don't want to actually be too presumptuous, but there's a lot of things in the news recently, especially this year. We're seeing the narrative really climb up in mainstream media about issues with crypto, and we're starting to hear whispers and actually some real things about the SEC in the States coming down on companies that are doing ICOs. And the idea for a platform that actually focuses on blockchain ICOs and actually in securities is a big thing that I had discussed with Trevor, who's one of the founders of Polymath, is going to be a big thing this year. And securities platforms are something I've actually invested in a few different ones, but ways that we can actually take what's really interesting in blockchain, which is being able to raise capital, or one of the interesting things, to be able to raise capital from the crowd, but do it in a way that's actually going to be able to be regulated or actually using the securities model. And what Polymath has done is pretty similar to what we did with Ethereum back in the day, without necessarily the focus on securities. To give a little background on myself and my journey, and the question, or the purpose, the theme of the talk, which was kind of thrown together. I don't usually come up with themes or I like to just come up on stage and just start talking. But this one was really around, can Canada really maintain its lead or maybe dominance in the blockchain space? So I'm going to talk a little about how that's come about, how we've become such a force, and I'll take you through my journey in the space and building communities out here in Canada that I think has kind of helped to lead to the growth in the amount of companies that we have here in Canada, and also talk about why, unfortunately, a number of companies are deciding to go overseas in order to set their companies up, and how that could eventually lead to a lot of issues maybe in Canada of us not being able to maintain a lead or maintain our dominance in the blockchain space. So in 2012, I heard about Bitcoin. I've been spending a couple years looking into economics and looking into what had happened with the financial crisis and the housing crisis. It's a story that a lot of the Polycon people are probably going to know, so I'm not going to go through it too much because I feel like I'm going to be repeating myself and too many people. But I've been a technologist all my life, very early on, since I was under 10, building computers, robotics camps, and decided to go to school. Went to Ryerson for business. Very early 90s, I was on the internet developing websites. Before that, I was on BBSs, bulletin board systems, and went through the whole phase of modems from very early on before the internet came about. Always interested in connecting with people and being able to connect to other people's computers and network systems. But I decided to go into business instead of going to computers because I already had that kind of thing lined up as being a technologist and being someone that's just already had that lined up. I didn't want to go to become a developer. I followed my dad as an entrepreneur, and instead of being a coder, I went to school for business, had a marketing degree, minor in international business. I spent the 2000s working for the family business, which was sliding patio doors, and it was a lot of being there that I learned a lot about how to deal with people, how to get my certain way of leadership, how to manage people, and many different areas of small business that's really helped me in what I've done here in the blockchain space. In 2008, my dad and his brothers decided to sell the business, and I had an opportunity to do something different and something that I had the choice to do, and I decided to get into geothermal drilling. For those who don't know, geothermal drilling is a means of drilling holes into the ground where you can heat and cool buildings using the Earth's temperature. So I bought this massive drill from Italy, and I started working on IKEA buildings and commercial centers and condos to be involved in a real forward-thinking technology, something that always had been interesting to me, something in the green realm. And what happened a couple years later, this was about 2010, 2011, is the government kind of got their hands on it, and they started really slowing down and creating a lot of red tape, which happens a lot when there's new emerging technologies come out that they don't fully understand. And it led me to drop that business and to actually lease out my drill and have someone else maintain it. But I found myself at that time coming off as well, being a owner of a few properties at York University from 2005 to 2010, and I started digging into what money is. My brother had gone through a rough time. He was previously a city councillor in Richmond Hill, and he kind of went down a rabbit hole on the internet, and something I couldn't quite understand is he started to become kind of really anti-government at the time, and anti-bank, and anti-establishment. And in a way to try to understand what he was going through, it was difficult for him to show me online or show me stuff, but he did mention one thing to me is to really learn what money is. So I started digging into it, and it really took me down an interesting rabbit hole. I learned, I think, a little bit differently than him to be more diplomatic with things and not to really go off the deep end. And it's something that I carry from that day, that experience of being able to be diplomatic with people, and actually to get to the end game, you have to really work with people. So I started digging into what money was, and I started looking at the history of money, and I started looking at the history of sound money, the way that money progressed from being things like feathers, means of exchange, has different qualities that make it what it is. And then in 1971, we had something happen where Nixon took the US off the gold standard, and we kind of led to this system that we have these days of inflation that reduces the value of what we have of our money. So I started looking, this was just after the housing crisis and the banking crisis, and I started trying to understand how companies and how these massive guys that have been around a long time could just disappear. And I started looking for people that had actually predicted what was going to be happening there, and I fell into this gentleman called Peter Schiff. Peter Schiff is an economist. He has a bank called Euro Pacific Capital, a company called Euro Pacific Capital, and has a bank. And I saw these videos called Peter Schiff Was Right, of him before the housing crisis, the banking crisis, on shows on Fox News and CNN, being laughed off the stage because of what he saw was coming, based on his thinking of the problem we have is we have these booms and bust cycles, and a lot has to do with the government's ability to print money. So I started studying a different school of economics called the Austrian School, and I was listening to his show on a daily basis for about a year, where I was seeing him interview, and I was seeing him to really challenge people on the different way of thinking that we're so used to, which is more of the Keynesian model of thinking, which leads to these booms and bust cycles. So here I find myself in 2011. I decided to sell my properties because I thought, okay, the same thing's going to happen in Canada here that we happen in the US. I was wrong. And I also started dabbling a bit in gold and silver, lost 20% of what I had there the first year, of what I put into it. And one other thing that Peter Schiff is very big on as well is personal freedom and personal liberty. So listening to his podcasts, I decided to look for some other podcasts on liberty and freedom. And I came across this show called Free Talk Live. And on Free Talk Live, it's a podcast that runs 365 days a year. It's a pure open call-in show where they encourage anybody to call in to talk about what they want. And it really comes from more of a personal responsibility kind of theme and personal freedom theme. And it was on that first show in 2012 in the summer that I first heard about Bitcoin. I first heard about it, looked it up, and I'm like, hey, what is this thing? And I think I'm one of the few people that I've come across that actually could say I grasped it right away. I took what I had learned in technology I took what I'd learned in economics recently, and I was able to see this and go, this is huge. For the first time ever, I can have something and be my own bank, and I can move something of value from one person to another instantly, globally, without needing third parties or intermediaries. Growing up in the whole age of the internet, I saw the disruption that occurred to everything to do with movement of information. Postal services, self-publishing, the internet disrupted everything to do with information. And I now saw that this disruption was going to actually occur with anything to do with value transfer and value movement. So that day, I also kind of understood that this was going to be bigger than the internet, and I really felt it. I saw this is fantastic. That day, I went out and bought my first Bitcoin at $9.73 on a site called Local Bitcoins. Didn't sleep for a number of weeks, and then I looked for a community. I looked for a community because I knew this was something that I really wanted to be part of, and I started thinking, how can I take what I've learned in my entrepreneurial skills along with what I've learned in economics and technology to create some real value in this space? I looked for a community. There was nothing out there. Here we are in 2012. There was nothing out there, so I decided to create it. I set up the Toronto Bitcoin Meetup Group. I was living up in Richmond Hill at the time. I traveled downtown to Toronto and put on my first event at a bar and had 8 people show up. Of those people, 2 very prominent people in our space. One was Vitalik Buterin, who was a 17-year-old kid at the time, and Peter Todd, another prominent person in the blockchain Bitcoin ecosystem. Over the next months, I continued to have events, and the events kept on growing, and I really became a center of gravity in Toronto for people to rally around or to become part of as people really passionate were starting to come together and start understanding the potential of the technology. In early 2013, I started understanding that the technology of the wallet in the Bitcoin blockchain space is very similar to that of the browser and the internet. The browser enables you to manage and move information. It's what led to the tool that the masses use in order to use the internet. It's what my dad uses in order to utilize the internet. And I realized that the wallet, the way that you manage and move digital assets, is a very similar concept, and it's very similar to being the browser for value transfer. So I started building a wallet company. Me and a friend of mine, Stephen Dack from New Jersey, created a company called CryptoKit. In October 2013, we launched CryptoKit. It was a Chrome extension Bitcoin wallet that enabled the user to be in control of the keys to their money. I never want to take custodianship of people's money, and it kind of goes in tune with the way Bitcoin and blockchain should be, is that you have the ability to be in control of your life, in control of your assets, in control of your money. So we launched that in October 2013, and about a month later, Vitalik Buterin, a gentleman who I'd gotten to know very well since the year that I started the Bitcoin meetups, approached me with a concept for a white paper, and that was Ethereum. He showed it to me. I had previously brought him on board into CryptoKit. He was helping us to carry that project out. I showed it to a colleague and friend of mine, Charles Hoskinson, who I'd gotten to know through the Bitcoin Education Project. And Ethereum was really a little bit over my head in some of the technology in there. And I showed it to Charles, and Charles was like, this is it, this is the Holy Grail. We brought together a few other people, Mihai Alize and Yamir Chetrit. At the same time, I decided to open up a physical location in Toronto. It was called Bitcoin Decentral. It was at King and Spadina. Those of you might remember the big orange sign that we had there, right off the highway off of Spadina, people screaming. It was, we see the Bitcoin sign there screaming as people drove by. And it was the same time that we started launching Ethereum. And Decentral became the first home to the Ethereum project. I brought in some of my lawyers at the time, accountants, and we had this hub in Toronto where people could come together and ideas could flourish. And we had Vitalik down there every day, and we started working on the project. In January 2014, we officially announced the project in Miami conference. And that's really when things really started changing. We started getting so much response. We started thinking, okay, we better calm down a little bit with this. We've been planning to do a crowd sale to raise capital in order to fund the execution of Ethereum. And we took a step back and took many months to kind of get organized and get set up so that we could eventually do a crowd sale that would be viable in the rest of the world. So when I first heard about Ethereum, it was something I didn't fully grasp, but soon after I understood that the potential now for this technology and potential of blockchain, along with a virtual machine system that executes what's called smart contracts, code that executes based on data fed into it, was going to be even more powerful than Bitcoin, because now the disruption wasn't going to occur just in finance or around money. The ability to actually disrupt and disintermediate all the surfaces, all the services and all the different sectors, such as law, such as insurance, such as gaming, all these other sectors that could now be changed or disrupted due to the introduction of smart contracts along with a blockchain system. In the summer of 2014, we became the largest crowdfunded project of all time. We raised $18 million, 32,000 Bitcoin. And then over the next year, we began the mission to carry out the development of the project. So there's a number of things there that happened in Canada, a lot to do with community building, a lot to do with being able to bring people together and create companies and be able to get things going in the ecosystem. And I think a lot of what was done with Decentral and with our meetups and has really brought forth a great community here in Canada. We had a similar organization, which wasn't related to me, also in Vancouver, called Decentral Vancouver. Again, bringing together communities where ideas could start flourish and ideas can grow. And where we are right now is there's a lot of good ideas and projects coming out of Canada, but a number of them are actually going offshore in order to set up. They're going to places like the Caribbean, they're going to Barbados, they're going to Bermuda. They're going to places where countries are understanding that they could actually get ahead in this space. And if they actually are attracting and encouraging entrepreneurs into their countries, they have another means in order to get ahead and be ahead of the curve. And where are we in Canada right now? We're in a place where I think there's a lot of uncertainty. It's very difficult to know what the rules of the game are. It's hard to know how taxes are treated. I mean, we know kind of how Bitcoin's treated, but how is Ethereum treated? How is moving funds from token to token on Ethereum? Does that consider a tax event? There's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of unknowns. And when there's uncertainty, unknowns, entrepreneurs have a difficult time carrying out projects. I mean, it's already a difficult thing for them to be doing, but then to start thinking, well, you know, there's all these things that we got to consider and we have to be concerned about. So a lot of projects are moving offshore. It's not something that I anticipate doing. Decentral still, we're in our 4th year right now. We just had our 4th year anniversary. We just moved into a 15,000 square foot facility at Peter in Adelaide. We're building out this amazing office there. And, you know, why aren't I moving out there? Well, a couple reasons. One is I don't take people's money. We don't need to raise capital. A lot of this comes when you need to raise capital or you do an ICO and people are putting these tokens out there and they want to build a community, but a lot of them are being considered potentially security offerings. So a lot of the companies, just to be certain, they're setting up offshore, they're setting things up to be cautious in that sense. But since I'm not taking anybody's money or not holding on to people's money, which is another big thing, we create a wallet out of Decentral called Jaxx, where we've got about a million users on a 30-day basis. We're a multi-currency, multi-platform interface for all the many different cryptocurrencies. We've got about 75 that we support right now. And our plan has always been to never hold or have access to people's funds. So because we never take custodianship, or because we're not raising capital, we're in a pretty good position where we don't have to worry about too many things. But we're a unique case, and most people do need to raise capital, and you need to build a community to distinguish yourself from other projects. So I am a little concerned about the non-clarity that we have here in Canada. It makes it very difficult for colleagues of mine to operate their businesses because of that lack of clarity. And that's why we're seeing a lot of them go overseas. This year, I'm already feeling it. The narrative is kind of changing, where we're hearing a lot of hints about things that are going to start being called into question by the SEC and by different organizations. And I think it is the opportunity for countries around the world to start distinguishing themselves, to start understanding that the amount of growth you're going to see here is going to be massively greater than the internet and what the internet was able to bring about. And if we here in Canada can encourage the entrepreneurs and encourage people here to start developing and take lead in here, we have an amazing opportunity to create new sectors, to figure out new ways to make money, and to figure out new ways to create jobs. And I do encourage the many different areas of Canada to start coming together and start providing some clarity so we know where we're operating in and that we can have entrepreneurs actually stay here in Canada. Thank you very much. I got time for questions?
Do we have time?
Craig? Any idea what I got for, do I have time for questions or do you want to? I got time for a few questions. Anybody? Yes. Yeah, so banking has always been a big issue for crypto companies. Sometimes the mention of the word Bitcoin in your name or even bit has led to a lot of issues. I do think, though, that the banks, just like governments, are realizing there's a lot of benefits in order for to utilizing these technologies, and they're trying to figure out how they can benefit while also not hindering their means of making money. So they want to, and I think they should be, encouraging startups and encouraging fintech companies to come together and let's start thinking how we can all work together to create real value that might distinguish us globally, rather than thinking what's going on in the country here. So there are a lot of interesting plays that I think banks can understand this technology will be very useful, but at the same time it's very difficult if you're a startup or an entrepreneur in this space to actually get bank accounts. And until you actually can prove or that you have a lot of that they can make money from you, they really are risk adverse to actually taking those initiatives, because it's just not worth it sometimes when they're so heavily regulated to take the risk with a small startup or a young startup in order to get banking. Yes?
Do you think NCFA can work with any other to get Canada on line to help this?
Well, I think that'd be more of a thing for Craig. Yeah, I mean, I think a whole bunch of people need to come together, a whole bunch of groups, a whole bunch of entrepreneurs need to come together and really develop a strategy and play that can work to work together with the regulators and governments. I'm all about doing things in a diplomatic fashion that creates wins for everybody. And I think if we go with the long-term goal of how do we distinguish Canada with the rest of the world, and if we all come together to do that, I think there's a good opportunity for that, but it all comes down to education, ensuring that we're not making any bold moves without understanding exactly what's going on, and we don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot. I think that we can do much more to encourage growth and encourage the companies here, and I think it's a matter of entrepreneurs coming together and actually creating that narrative and then working with governments and regulators to carry it out. You're welcome. One more? Anyone? Oh, yes. Sure, so we don't do it to get around it. I do it because I don't want to hold people's money. I don't want to hold people's money or have access to money. That's kind of what this whole technology enables. So we figured out a way that we can create a wallet that doesn't hold on to people's money. The keys are actually created on the client device, and the keys tie into the blockchains. And we're just this interface that kind of connects to the blockchains, but all the signing of the transactions are done with keys that we don't have access to and are on individual machines. So there's no centralized server, centralized system we have that actually can get hacked. If the customer's phone isn't secured properly, their keys could potentially be compromised, but we don't ever have access to the keys or hold those keys. Our code is open and visible for anybody to see how it works. So that's how we do it, and it's actually, you know, it's a system that I can sleep better at night because I'm not holding on to customers' money or have access to their funds. Cool. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.